This is Join Us in France, episode 23. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elise is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller.
Oh my God, yes.
On today's show, we'll be talking about the marvelous city of Carcassonne. Now, I don't know what to say about Carcassonne. I've been there so many times because around where we live, it's the place where you take all your visitors.
All your visitors.
It is fabulous. It's an old walled city. Is it medieval or is it later?
Ooh, it's earlier.
It's early. Oh, there you go.
There we go.
It's old. It's very old. It's very well preserved because I think they didn't really lose anything. Nobody ever attacked them for real because it looked pretty formidable.
No, it's more complicated than that.
Okay, that's why she needs to be the guide, and I just need to, a little bit of music to get us in the mood, and then we'll get right into Carcassonne. Okay, so today, before we get started, I want to thank some listeners who've been very good to us. Now, we're getting more comments on the website, which I really like because I can't miss those at all. So that's good. The first are Randy and Dean Dudling, who say, these podcasts are a wonderful resource for anyone planning a trip to France. They are fun and full of great information to help you get the most out of your trip. Annie and Elise have a great rapport. Yeah, I guess that's right. And we look forward to listening to each episode. So thank you, Randy and Dean.
Thank you.
The other person we want to thank is Pat, who wrote a comment on episode 17 on food. And she says, very much enjoying this podcast. Food is always something I remember from each vacation. Can still remember the taste of breakfast croissant. Yeah, we just had some, huh?
We just had some,
Elise showed
yes.
up this morning with some croissant. It was very nice. So croissant, dinner crepes, and croque-monsieur. And that was 15 years ago. You have a good memory, Pat. Thank you for making me even more eager to head to France soon.
Yes, do it again.
Yes, please do it again. It would be wonderful. And the last person we want to thank today is Clifford from Georgia, USA, who sent us an email at info@joinusinfrance.com. And he says, thank you so much for taking the time to inform us on the ins and outs of French culture. I just arrived in France a week and a half ago. Welcome to France. And I already have listened to almost all of your episodes.
Oh, good for you.
Wow. And they have helped me a lot, he says. He'll be traveling to Vendée, where he'll be teaching English for 6 weeks. So he's probably a young guy. And then he says, hopefully spending a lot of time learning French. Oh, yeah, what else are you going to do besides teaching?
Eat.
Oh, that too, yes. And he says, I was hoping you might consider doing more episodes on regions outside of Paris. Thank you very much for your help. The information has been very helpful and quickly applicable for me, having recently arrived in this beautiful country. Yes, Clifford, we are planning on adding a lot of podcasts about various places in France. We are going to branch out to outside of Paris. And you know what? The best thing you can do to help us keep going is to write us reviews.
Write us reviews.
And share the podcast with people you know who like France and are interested in coming to France. Because if we see the download numbers keep growing, we're going to produce more episodes.
We're going to talk more.
That's how it works. So if you want to hear more, share. Share liberally. Okay, so thank you very much for these reviews and comments. And keep them coming. We enjoy hearing from you. Now, how about Carcassonne, Elise?
How about Carcassonne?
Okay, see, I've been many times, but I don't know everything, obviously.
Well, that's why I'm here, right?
I know how to get a good parking spot there, though.
Oh, well, that's one of those things we, I guess, have to talk about. But just in relation to just the reviews and comments you just read, so this is, in fact, after Albi, and after a couple of the places that we've talked about that are basically what we could call day visits outside of Paris itself, This is another example of one of the places that we're going to start talking about that are indeed very far from Paris. And it's connected to a specific region of France in the southwest. And what I think we're going to try and do is we're going to maybe start to alternate, maybe not so rigorously as that, but we're going to do Paris and its surroundings and then someplace farther away so people can get a little bit of both.
Right.
We chose to talk about Carcassonne, I think, for two reasons. One, because it is a very popular place for people to go to visit, and it is in the southwest of France.
Right.
So it's not very far from where we actually live.
Mm-hmm.
And also because, like a few of the other places we've actually talked about, one of them being Albi and another one being the center of Reims, and of course Versailles, strangely enough, we're sort of picking on places, maybe that's not so strange after all, that have now become part of this list of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which is part of the reason why they have gained such importance as tourist destinations.
Right.
Now, what is Carcassonne? Well, as Annie mentioned...
It's a board game. Did you know?
No.
Yes.
Oh, really?
There's a fun board game called Carcassonne.
Oh, we have to buy it. We have to play it.
I don't have it, actually. But I played it with some friends who were actually Juliana and Richard. Hello. They were actually in Paris just recently and used our podcast as well. And last time they visited, they brought the game and we played it here. It was fun. It's a good game.
I wonder if I get to be a count or countess if I play it or something.
No, it's one of those games where you build a civilization. Yeah, it's kind of fun. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Carcassonne is, in fact, the Carcassonne that we're going to talk about mostly. What it is, quite simply, is the largest completely walled medieval city that is still intact and in existence in all of Western Europe. And I did go online because I wanted to make sure that, I know sometimes people say, oh, well, I went online and I found such and such was actually bigger. But as far as I know, this really is indeed the biggest. There's another one that's very famous in Croatia called Dubrovnik, which is also a walled city, but it is not as big as Carcassonne.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does that mean? Well, a walled city is what was basically the norm in the early part of the Middle Ages, and it was the way people lived. They usually built settlements and cities, and they surrounded themselves with walls to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. Carcassonne, though, has a very, very long and very interesting history, and where it is. Let's just put it in a context. It is in the department of the Aude, which is spelled Aude, named after the river Aude, which runs down below the ramparts of the old city of Carcassonne. Mm-hmm. And it is up on top of a promontory, not really even a hill. It's really a rocky promontory. And it's in this large valley, the river Aude, which is a moderately big river, has lots of teeny little rivers that run into it. It's a long, long valley that actually cuts pretty much east-west, coming from the Mediterranean and going westward. And on the north side of this large valley, you have rocky cliffs, and you enter into a zone that's part of the large, oldest mountains of France, which is called collectively the Massif Central, which means the central mass of mountains. Mm-hmm. The local ones right north of Carcassonne are actually called the Black Mountains.
Yeah, Montagne Noire, yeah.
And these are mountains that are called black because of the density of the forest and the fact that they pick up a huge amount of humidity, which means that they're always very, very wet. Huh. It's not because of the soil, actually. These are low mountains. These would be the equivalent of like the Appalachians or the Adirondacks in the United States.
Yeah.
And on the south side of this large valley that cuts east-west, you enter into the foothills and then eventually into the Pyrenees,
right?
Which, of course, are much higher. These are mountains that go up to, in meters, 3,750 meters, which I believe is about 10 10,000 or 500 feet, or maybe 11,000. I'm not exactly sure.
No
but
idea.
anyway, it's a big chain, of course. It
Yeah.
runs east and west. And Carcassonne was, like a lot of other these places that we talk about, originally settled by a Celtic tribe. And the Celts are the first people documented to have lived all over France, actually. Nobody really knows who was here before exactly, but the Celts were the first group with a civilization that left evidence of what they lived like and everything. They were up in Paris, too. They were pretty much everywhere. And each tribe, each area had its own names, and they were the ones in their language, and I don't know if anybody knows if it has any meaning, but they gave the name to this settlement that they had, and they called it Carcassonne, which is pretty much the way the Romans pronounced it and spelled it, because who knows exactly if that was the exact pronunciation at the time.
Right.
But in fact, the Celts, wherever they were, they built what are called oppidum. And I like that word. I don't know why, but I love that word. It's a cute little word, isn't it?
Yeah.
And an oppidum is actually, it comes from a word that means defensive settlement.
Okay.
And it was a place that was built high up or in an isolated place where things could be seen 360 degrees around with protective walls around it.
Okay. Well, that's exactly what it is.
And that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And that was what the Romans found when they arrived there in about 100 BC. And so there was already this settlement there. It was actually not on the exact hill that you see, the one that we go to now, but on a hill just next to it, actually, very close by. And the Romans, as we know, and we'll talk about forever and ever, because, of course, we talked about them in relation to Paris, and we talked about them in relation to Reims, and they were everywhere, you know.
Yeah.
And they just went wherever they could, and of course they had this big army, so pretty much nobody could stop them. But what they did do, which was always interesting, was that they checked out where the original groups lived, and they thought about whether this was a good place to live or not, and why this group of people had chosen to live there. And usually they kind of agreed with them. It's like they assumed that there was a certain intelligence in each of these civilizations. And so what they did was they took over, apparently with not too much resistance. I don't know if anybody really knows how many people live there, but they took over this area, and they took over this promontory that is where we go to visit now. And they set up their own reinforcements, and they built new walls using some of the old stone, because this is a region where everybody builds things with stone. It's a very big limestone area. And they created a small city with ramparts around it. And the original Roman walls actually were the equivalent of about a mile around.
Okay.
About 1.5 kilometers.
Yeah, it's bigger than that now.
Well, it's because there's a second set of walls around it on the outside.
Okay.
And they built these walls with towers, these classical Roman towers, which are U-shaped towers. And it was used as largely a military outpost, but there were people who lived inside it as well. And this is going back 2,000 years. All right? So it already has a history, and it's a visible history. And one of the things that's really fun when you go to Carcassonne is that you get to see these walls. And we'll talk about the whole question of the walls and all of this there. Now, over the centuries, and there's a little bit of history that I'm not going to spend too much time, but I have to give a little bit of background history. But one of the things that makes Carcassonne a fabulous place to visit, if you're interested in understanding the architecture of the centuries between the Romans and medieval times, and what a typical city that had military architecture but also had civil people living in it looked like, this is why people go to Carcassonne. And of course, it has to do with the fact that the way it has been restored, because it of course has been restored, has really enabled it has allowed for people to really understand the structure of the way things were built in those days. Now, the region that this is in is Mediterranean.
Sure.
What does that mean? That means that the climate is good for growing grapes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a wine-growing region.
Sure.
So all the way around it, it's all very hilly. It's very beautiful. There are grapevines everywhere. There's cypress trees and pine trees. It's not very, very far from Narbonne, which is the main city on the coast that the Romans had created and was a very, very important center. And it's a city, therefore, because it's Mediterranean, that has a relatively dry and sunny climate.
Uh-huh.
It actually has a fair amount of winds because it's in this corridor going east-west, and it gets also some winds coming down. Yeah, and it gets some winds coming down from the north as well.
Yeah.
But it's a very beautiful area, and it developed under the Romans as a major trading center. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that it was a trading center largely for textiles, which I didn't know until I was doing a little bit of more background information, and for woolen goods, because besides besides the grapevines, which still surround it actually on all sides, I mean, it's fabulous to see. It was an area that had enormous amounts of sheep,
right?
And the wool. There's a little town not far from Carcassonne called Mazamet, which is still known for the quality of its woolen goods. Yeah. And this goes back 2,000 years to the time of the Romans.
Wow.
So it was a major center for trade. And because it was perched up high above, whenever they had to travel, going either east towards the coast and the Mediterranean, or west going towards the other major city on the Roman route, which was Toulouse, which is about 85 kilometers away, they were able to make a stop in Carcassonne because it was safe, because it was high up on the hill, and of course it was a good place to stop because, being that it was a trade center, there were places to sleep and there were places to eat, just like there are now.
That's right.
Just like there are now.
One of the, I was surprised a few years ago, the New York Times had some list of the hotels that you must visit once in your life, and there was one that was l'Hôtel de la Cité in Carcassonne.
Yes. Well, can I tell you, I have to confess, I've actually slept in it.
Oh, so what was it like?
Well, now, I'm not someone who has the means to stay in lots of palaces and five-star hotels.
Right.
I've stayed in a couple, mostly, fortunately for me, connected with work. And in this case, it was also connected with work. Uh-huh. This is a number of years ago. I was guiding a group. I was going to spend 3 days with them, and they were staying in this hotel, which is called the Hôtel de la Cité.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to go back and forth every day, which is, it's from Toulouse.
It's a long drive.
It's a long drive back and forth every day. And it happened that in this group that was staying in the hotel, there was a couple that were no-shows.
Ah.
And the woman who ran the agency at the time that I was working for, she said to me, she said, this room has been prepaid. And at least for tonight, we have to pay it. Because if there's a no-show, they usually take one night. And then afterwards, they can give the room back. And she said to me, would you want to spend the night? Well, of course, I had gone for a day, so I didn't have any change of clothes or anything like that. And I said to her, well, I guess so. And she said, look, we'll take care of the little amenities and all of that. And besides which, in each room, you have this setup where they give you a toothbrush and toothpaste, and, there's a bathrobe and all of this. So I said, well, I guess so, Of course, I had to call home and say, guess what? I'm staying in this, and I got lots of static on the other end of the line. But anyway, I happened to be in a room, and I unfortunately don't think all the rooms are quite like this, but it was a magnificent corner room that was absolutely huge with all of this beautiful antique, beautiful furniture.
Yeah.
And it looked out on the ramparts because there's a garden behind the hotel, and then behind the garden, there's actually the ramparts. Mm-hmm. So it was lovely. Mm-hmm. However, I think it's the atmosphere of the hotel, because it has an excellent restaurant that's highly rated. It has an excellent bar. It has a swimming pool. And because of where it is situated, that it is such a top-rated hotel, I think it was lovely. Personally, I don't think I'm expert enough to be able to say whether I thought it was really worth having in the category of the hotels you shouldn't miss in the world.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
sure. I'm not sure.
I've never stayed there or eaten there.
The bar is gorgeous down below. I did have occasion to have a couple of lunches in the restaurant. It's supposed to be one of the best restaurants in the whole region. But again, I've stayed in other places that are nice. This place was beautiful, but I can't say that I would say it was one of the
Wouldn't
10.
be your first pick.
No,
Yeah,
it would
yeah.
not be
Yeah.
my first
Okay.
pick. But
That's
anyway,
good. Yeah.
so Carcassonne. So Carcassonne then lived through the centuries, and it was largely this beautifully ramparted, if you want, walled city. And then, of course, its major claim to history has to do with a part of the history of France in the Southwest, starting in the 1200s, which is something that eventually we will talk about, and I think I would actually like to do a podcast about. And that is something unique only to what is the southwest of France. It didn't really affect anywhere else. And that is a war that took place in the first half of the 1200s, which, of course, for most people seems like ancient times, but is really relevant to what happened later on in the rest of the southwest of France. And what that was there was a war that was basically a religious war. And it was a war that was created and instigated, if you will, by the Pope in Rome in conjunction with the King of France, because in the 1200s, the Southwest was not part of France. It was a separate kingdom.
Right.
And it was a kingdom run by a man who was the Count of Toulouse.
Right.
And he was, in fact, a direct descendant of Charlemagne and all the Franks and all of that. And the designation count was really the equivalent of king in this area. And he ruled a territory that went from the Mediterranean and up above a little bit almost to Arles, and as far west as the Dordogne, which is taking us into another dukedom or duchy, which was, of course, Aquitaine. And he was very, very important and powerful. And there were several viscounts, and there were several other lords that were also very important, that were all cousins. They were all connected to the same family. And they ran basically this territory in the feudal structure. You know, there's a kind of pyramid organization to all of that. And in this region, for reasons that have to do a little bit with the spirit of independence and a certain laxity, actually, but probably other reasons that are largely theological that are hard for us today to understand, a new Christian movement developed starting basically in the 1100s. And it came through northern Italy in Lombardy, where it was also very important, originally apparently from Eastern Europe. And it moved into Provence and came across into the area of the Southwest, where it became very, very, very important. And this new Christian movement, which in modern times could be considered to be a kind of parallel to a Protestant sect as opposed to the Roman Catholic Church, became very, very, very important and popular for a couple of reasons that make it very interesting. One of which was that there was no pyramidal hierarchy.
Right.
And many of the people who were resentful of the Roman Catholic Church by this time were resentful of its enormous wealth, its enormous power, and the fact that just like with kings and monarchs, everything was very much hierarchical.
Very much,
and,
yes.
And you had to obey. And you had to obey the priest, and you had to obey the bishop, and you had to obey the cardinals, and you had no choice in what you could do. And there was a lot of repression, and it wasn't so much the repression as the idea that the church was accumulating enormous amounts of wealth.
Exactly, yeah.
And people really did not have a say in anything in terms of what they wanted to do. The church was, in fact, more powerful than the princes and the kings at that time. And so this new movement, which allowed for everyone to be equal, and you became a member of this new church by the laying on of hands and the recital of several prayers, it allowed for people to take on a sense of equality. And one of the other reasons that made this movement so important, and is, of course, one of the reasons that personally I find so fascinating, and a lot of research has been done in the last 50 years about it, is because it allowed for women to have equal importance as much as men.
That's right. Women could be clergy.
Women could be clergy. Women could do the conversion. Women could do the last rites, which was called the consolamentum. And women were allowed to preach. And so what happened was, in the southwest of France, it was enormous numbers of the upper class aristocratic women, as well as the men, who moved to this new Christian movement or church, if you want to call it that. But they didn't actually call themselves a church, even though they said they were Christian. And so you have the counts and viscounts and a lot of their wives and sisters and mothers. And a lot of times the mothers and the women who were older and had passed through their childbearing years, they not only decided to convert, but they became members of the clergy. Because if you became a member of the clergy in this new religion, which was called a perfect person, you renounced sexual activity. You lived in communal houses, the women with the women, the men with the men, and you were a vegetarian, and you did good works. And a lot of them were weavers. They worked in the textile trade, which is why Carcassonne became such an important center for all of this. And you traveled around from village to village, spreading the good word.
Right.
And you lived with the people and you shared whatever you had.
Right. And they didn't use any weapons either.
They did not use any weapons either.
They weren't able to even hold a weapon.
However, they did have what are called the feidi, which is they had knights who were sworn to allegiance to them and did in fact protect them. Yeah. So what happens is that this region surrounding Carcassonne and going as far as the city to the west, which is Toulouse, and coming from Provence, all of this region becomes a hotbed of this new religion. And in the beginning of the 1200s, the Roman Catholic Church decided that it was going to lose its influence in this region if they didn't do something to stop it. And so they joined together with the King of France. Now, remember, the King of France was this king up in the north in this region around Ile-de-France and Paris. And he coveted this region down south, which was very rich land and very big. And so, given money by the Pope, they organized an enormous army. Enormous, 40,000 soldiers, led by a minor nobleman from Normandy named Simon de Montfort, who was not the first, not the second, not the third, but apparently about the 12th military man loyal to the Roman Catholic Church to be asked to lead this army, because every other nobleman said no. Because they were all intermarried and related to one another, and they didn't want to have part in what they knew was going to be this horrible fighting down south against people that they had nothing against, because basically they couldn't have cared less what was happening in the south. Yeah. So what happened was that there was, and since this is really about Carcassonne, this podcast, I don't want to go into too much detail, but let's just say that the war started in the year 1209. And it ended in the year 1229. That's 20 years. Yeah. That's a long time. Now, there wasn't constant fighting for 20 years, because what happened was that the Pope and King of France's army did, in fact, win. And one of the reasons they won is because the various lords in all of these different places in the southwest, including the Viscount of Carcassonne, whose name was Roger Raymond Trencavel, Trencavel, yes. They were unable to unite. They were very uncooperative with one another. And of course, unity is force. And in this case, the fact that they weren't united was their downfall. And Trencavel, who was apparently a very courageous young man, he was the Viscount of Carcassonne. He lived in a castle inside the walled upper city, because there is a lower city now, this famous old city that we're talking about. And he tried to unite all of these people. His forces were not as large as he expected. And what happened was, when this massive army arrived in Carcassonne and surrounded the city, which is up on this promontory It's all limestone. Believe it or not, it's hard to believe, but actually, at the time that this happened, there were no wells inside the city. And everyone had to go out the gates of the walls
To get water.
to get the water, because there were these 3 small rivers running down below connecting to the Aude River. And so there were probably wells on the outside, because by this time there were already little huts and little villages started on the outside of the walls. And
Right.
people lived that way, and they knew that if there was any danger, the gates would open, they could go inside the fortified city and,
Right.
and be protected. That was one of the things about feudalism, is that the Lord was there to protect you. If
That
you
was
were,
the deal,
That was
yes.
the deal,
Yeah.
right? So what happened was that the Pope and French king's army surrounded Carcassonne in July of 1209 of 1209, and in 3 weeks there was no water left, and there was barely any food. And so the Viscount Trencavel, he negotiated with this army, and he said, I will give myself up. I will do whatever you want if you allow all of my people to go free. Do not assassinate them, because they'd been assassinating everybody along the way getting to Carcassonne. Allow them to be free, even if it means they have to leave the city and go elsewhere. And that is what happened.
Oh, wow.
So he was put into the prison of his own chateau, which is the castle that is inside the city. And that was in July. And in November, he died. And he was 24 years old.
Oh, wow.
And at 24, in those days, women married at 14 or 15 and men at 16 or 17. He already had a 5-year-old son. His wife was the daughter of the count of the area around Narbonne. She was allowed to go free with her son in exchange for signing over all the hereditary rights that her son would have had as the Viscount.
Oh, wow.
And she and her son went to live with their uncle, who was the Count of Foix, which is south in the Pyrenees.
Oh.
And what happened was that Carcassonne was taken over by the Roman Catholic prelate who was representing the church, and by the representatives of this northern king. Down here in the south, we still don't like the northern king, very much. The northern king. And what happened was this. The old city of Carcassonne in 1229 was built on the ruins of the Roman walls. There was a castle built onto the walls inside.
Right.
There was a church, which was actually a cathedral.
Yeah, there's a nice church in
beautiful,
there.
Beautiful
Yep,
church on the
yep.
inside. And there were probably altogether several thousand people who lived and worked either inside the walled city or in the little villages that had basically been built onto the outside of the ramparts. Everybody was evacuated from Carcassonne. It was made into a military outpost. And the French king, and then subsequently his 2 descendants, including St. Louis, who came a little bit later on at the beginning of the 1300s, what they decided to do, because Carcassonne was so important, not only militarily, but for the trade routes, and they had taken over, and they wanted to, of course, to conquer all of the lands in the southwest, they decided to build a second set of ramparts, which is why there are 2 sets of ramparts to be seen when you visit Carcassonne. So this second set of ramparts, which exist today and which are really incredibly impressive, they are built on 3 sides on land that was incredibly steep. There was a promontory, and there was actually no land there to speak of. The first set of walls built by the Romans and all the peoples that came after them were basically the edge of this hill, if you want, this piece of rock. And in order to build the second set of ramparts, they had to dig out a little under the foundation of the first set of ramparts, and then take dirt and earth and land from down below and bring it up, higher up, to make filler. So they actually had to level out. They actually had to dig down below a little bit beyond the bottom part of the first set of ramparts. and level out more or less. It's not totally level in some parts. It's still on a slight slant. But we're talking about something that was at about maybe 80 degrees slope, and they had to make it so that it was a walkable centerpiece in between these two sets of ramparts. It took several years, but not that long when you think about it, because all of this was done, of course, by just human labor and the equivalent of shovels and things like that.
Yeah.
And they were able to dig out and bring up enough land, enough soil and earth and filler rock to create what are now called the Lys, which is actually the enormous walkway that encircles completely the old city of Carcassonne. And as they did so, they built a second set of ramparts, which makes a total of 3 kilometers of wall all the way around the old city of Carcassonne. And they doubled the number of towers. There were originally 26 Roman towers. There are a total of 52.
So, okay, I'm trying to remember. So even where the castle, on the side where the castle is, there are 2 sets of ramparts along there? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
If you take a look at an aerial photo, you'll see them. It's really incredible. The castle that the Viscount Trencavel lived in when he was finally taken prisoner and then eventually died is a castle that still exists. It's part of what you do visit when you go into the old city. And it's built on the northern side. And it was originally built, they think that the original castle, which was really probably a couple of hundred years earlier, was built on the southern side. There is nothing left to indicate exactly what that structure looked like. But the grandfather of the Trencavel that wound up dying to defend his people, he built this new castle in the 1100s on the northern side and used the ramparts as one wall of the castle.
Oh, okay. That's why looks like there's no second rampart at that point.
And in fact, in the 20th century, in doing archaeological digging inside, when you visit the castle, which I'll just describe a little bit in a minute, but when you enter into the castle part in the old city, the old walled city, there's a huge open courtyard, and it's where all of the people go first when they start their visit in there. But there is, in fact, a little doorway that takes you into a piece of the old original walls. Now, these are really the Roman walls we're talking about that were used as the back wall of the castle. And I did have the occasion once with a private group to go in that doorway and down below, and there are pieces of Roman mosaic, beautiful black and white mosaic, and there are vestiges of what was the original Roman structure from 2,000 years ago, still inside the wall.
Wow.
So what happened was that the Carcassonne becoming part of now essentially what we could call the Kingdom of France, the second set of ramparts is built. And the second reason, or third reason, if you will, for building this second set of ramparts is not only is it as a military outpost to defend against eventual attacks by the local people, not only is it to protect the merchandise, but because the frontier between this kingdom and the kingdom of Aragon was very, very close. It was not where it is now.
Right.
It was actually very, very close. It was the equivalent of probably about 10 miles away.
Oh, wow.
And so even though they were all cousins, they fought with each other all the time. And they had to defend themselves. So this is what happens to Carcassonne. This second set of walls is built. There's a garrison that lives there. There are obviously people who live inside.
Yeah.
The people who were expelled from the original, what we call the cité, which is, of course, means the old walled city. They are sent across the other side of the river, the bigger river, which is the Aude River. This is really the equivalent of being about a mile away.
Yeah.
But that was it. They could rebuild a village there, but they couldn't cross over to the other side of the river. It was to make sure that they didn't try and attack it again. But by the time they had finished building the second set of ramparts, they built them in such a way that the old city of Carcassonne was not takeable.
Impregnable.
Not only that, but it was so impregnable. It was so impressive because this second set of ramparts is higher on two sides in terms of the steep sides than the first set, except that you don't see that because of the way it's set up on the hill. And they have these pits, open pits, so that it was actually physically impossible for anybody to get past the first set. But if they did get past the first set, then they had this big flat open space, and then they had military people on the towers of the second set of ramparts.
Right, and they could shoot them down.
And they could shoot them down, and they could just do whatever they want. The city developed such a reputation as being impregnable that when the Black Prince, this vagabond, bad English prince known as the Prince Noir, the Black Prince. He was actually, he was really a prince. I mean, he was an English prince. At the end of the 100 Years' War in the 1400s between the English and the French. Right. This goes on forever and ever and ever.
100 years.
100 years, off and on, 100 years. What happened was, and this is another whole thing, we'll talk about more when we eventually talk about Aquitaine, there were bands of mercenary English soldiers that had been left in the southwest of what is now France when the war was over. Or when the fighting stopped, because very often the fighting lasted a few years and then everybody went home. They took care of the harvests and things like that. I mean, really, this is the way they did it in those days. And so what happened was these men who had been fighting for the English princes and the English kings, they became bandits. And their leader was, in fact, a prince who refused to give up the fighting. And basically what he did was he swept across the southwest of France, coming from the Atlantic Ocean, and vandalized, destroyed, stole, killed, and people were terrified of him, really, really terrified. He attacked eventually the lower, newer Carcassonne that was built up a little bit by this time in the early 1400s, and literally went right past the old upper city of Carcassonne. Didn't even bother to try because everyone knew there was no chance. No chance. So what happened to Carcassonne was that after all of this war and after all the people were expelled, they were allowed to build this city down below, which of course makes everyone laugh hysterically because to this day it's called the New City, and it was built in the late 1300s. So you have to have an idea of what new and old is in relation to places like this.
Yeah, but the new city of Carcassonne is not that interesting. I mean, it's...
No, it's not. It was actually for a while. It's built in the form of a bastide, which means it was built on a grid system. It built its own cathedral to rival the cathedral of the old city up above. But basically, today, it is not particularly interesting.
Yeah, no.
People don't go to visit the Carcassonne down below. They visit the Carcassonne up above. The only reason people would be in the Carcassonne down below is if they are taking the train to get there. Or if they decide they're going to stay in a hotel down below rather than one of the hotels that are close to the old city up above. But just quickly, before we talk about the actual things to visit inside, the fate of old Carcassonne gets really interesting as it gets closer to modern times. It stopped being a military outpost in the middle of the 1600s when the frontier with Spain moved further south. And so it was no longer necessary to be used, and it was abandoned. And then it was eventually used by different people, squatters, all kinds of strange people, up through the Revolution. At the time of the Revolution, all of the beautiful pieces of reliquary work and treasures that were in the church inside the old city were taken out, were stolen or destroyed. One of the most terrible things that happened during the French Revolution was that there were documents in one of the towers that was called the Archival Tower. It still exists today. It was redone. That was actually built at the time of the second set of ramparts, that were documents of the entire war with the Cathars, of everything going back to the Romans. Everything was burned.
Oh,
this is the sad thing about things like revolutions. Every single document was destroyed. So the city, the old city, was really left to abandon. It was totally abandoned. By the time of the French Revolution, in the beginning of the 1800s, which is 200 years ago, the idea was that they were going to just tear it all down.
Oh, dear.
Tear the whole thing down. It was in ruin, but as in many places like this, the ruin was the rooftops. The ruin was...
That's where it starts.
That's where it starts.
If the roof goes to hell in a handbasket, the water's going to start seeping into the building, and then everything's going to rot, and you have to keep the roof at least.
You have to keep the roof. Now, what we're talking about is a walled city, which means that inside Carcassonne there was, and there are, houses.
Yeah.
There's a castle. Yeah. There's a church. It's not a little open structure. There's a whole city inside.
Yeah, there are people in there.
And so what happened was, in this interim period between the revolution and for a couple of decades, people squatted on the inside, but it was falling apart. Mostly not the walls, interestingly enough, but the tower roofs and things like that. And then what happened was that a local historian who actually was from Carcassonne decided in about 1820 that he would write to the people in Paris, because there were rumors that they were actually just going to tear this entire structure down. And he asked for some people to come to see it from Paris, because he thought that it was worth saving as a document to the medieval history of the Southwest.
Yeah.
And they did. And of course, the most important of these people was a man who is extremely important in the history of all of these places, who was both a writer and the first minister of culture and of historical monuments. And that is a man named Prosper Mérimée. Mérimée, who was known, in fact, for writing incredibly interesting short stories.
Yeah.
He was the first minister of historical monuments and culture. And he was very, very good friends, childhood friends, in fact, with a man also from Paris. They were both Parisians, who wound up being the savior of all of these places.
Okay, can I take a guess? I think I know who it is.
Yes, you do, of course.
Vauban?
No.
Oh, wrong.
No. Another V. Viollet-le-Duc.
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 Okay.
Viollet-le-Duc, who, interestingly enough, was someone who was trained as an engineer.
Okay.
And who developed, for reasons I'm not sure of, a passion for medieval architecture. And in the 1700s and early 1800s, medieval was ugly. Medieval was ugly. Gothic was considered to be ugly. In fact, the term Gothic is from late Renaissance times, was reused again in the 17 and 1800s. If people wanted to talk about ugly old architecture, they said it was Gothic. Well, of course, that is interesting when you consider the evolution of what we think of today.
Yeah.
And so what happened was, in the 1830s, Prosper Mérimée came south. And when he got to Carcassonne, he literally fell in love with it.
Well, it is a very nice place.
Even though...
But you had to have imagination. If it was
you have to
falling apart.
imagination, right? Because you have to imagine that by this time, poor people had built huts again on the outside of these ramparts. There were people squatting on the space in between the two sets of walls. Very poor people. People had destroyed a lot of what was inside the homes, and of course what was inside the original castle and everything. And in order to decide what to do with it, they had to get an image of what the original Carcassonne had, of course, looked like. But what happened was that Prosper Mérimée went back to Paris, convinced Viollet-le-Duc to come back down to look at Carcassonne with him. Then they went back to Paris and convinced the administration that it was indeed necessary to save this structure. And so starting actually in about 1850, they started planning on work to fix it up, spiff it up. In fact, to this day, only 30% of it needed fixing up. Which isn't that much if you consider that it's really almost 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
And what they mostly fixed up was the tops of the walls and the rooftops.
Right.
Now, they did have to rebuild a few of the towers, especially the archival tower, which was burnt by the revolutionaries. They fixed a little bit up to give back its aura to the actual Count's castle. They added a few things that they thought had originally been there, which is partly the wooden structure on the walls of the castle itself, which is inside the city, and what is called a barbican, which is this half-circle space that opens up into the count's castle,
Right.
because they assumed that's what it looked like. Now, this is what makes it so strange today. This is, of course, what people love to go and visit, among other things. Some of this was out of the imagination of Viollet-le-Duc, who had as a reference only what he saw in Paris and in the northern part of France.
You're right.
And that, of course, means beautiful little conical-shaped roofs with slate, which is absolutely not what they had on the rooftops of the towers here.
Yeah, very unlikely. Yeah.
Very unlikely. They were mostly flat with the terracotta tiles created in the Roman style. And one of the things that happened was that when they began the renovation work, already there were people that were contesting the style that was being used to do the renovation.
Right.
But it took a long time.
Yeah.
The renovation work was begun actually officially in 1855 and wasn't finished until about 1910. There are lots of photos that go back even into the 1800s that you can actually find that show what it looked like in those days.
You know me, I'll try.
And I know you will. And there were lots of people, interestingly enough, who really, really did not think that he had done a good job of renovation because they said it was not like what a southwestern medieval city would have looked like.
Right, right.
But
you still hear it today.
you still hear it today.
I've had people tell me that it was fake. I'm like, well, no. The castle at Disneyland is fake.
Yes.
But that is not fake. It's just rebuilt. Now,
It's rebuilt.
is it rebuilt 100% to how it was before? Well, probably not. We didn't have pictures back then.
Well,
it's not like...
It wasn't that. It was also that there were no pictures, but there were drawings usually. Most of the big monuments, things that were destroyed, there were engravings and drawings from the 1600s on. It's just that Viollet-le-Duc was somebody who had a particular image of what it should look like and didn't deviate from that very much, which means that in the case of some other buildings, they were actually redone after him. But in the case of Carcassonne itself, it was decided that it was too monumental a task. So what you see when you go there is some of the towers with the original roof in terracotta.
Yeah.
And some of the towers in these conical gray roofs with slate. And that's fine.
Yeah, they
because
look
in
nice.
fact, all of the work is done with the real materials and the building techniques of the original Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Nothing is fake. Nothing. Except that some people contest whether or not it really was impossible that there was this material or that material. But you know what? Who cares?
Yeah, you can always nitpick.
You can always nitpick.
But really, it's a beautiful place. You should visit it. For little kids, it's very fun because you can walk all around the ramparts. So it's a great place.
Let me just, there's a little bit more history because it's really interesting. Again, we get to this hotel you mentioned.
Yeah.
It was built in 1920. It was built, and it is still there, of course, and it's in between the church, which is called Saint-Nazaire, and a little bit down the little narrow medieval road from the Count's castle.
Right.
It is supposed to have been the bishop's palace that was simply taken over and renovated and made into a new structure. So, in fact, what it is, it's very interesting. If you want to talk about something that's a little bit fake, even though it's beautiful, they used the old stone, but they actually rebuilt it in what could be called neo-Gothic style. So it looks like it's as old as the other buildings, but in fact, it really is not. Now, in the 1940s, in 1944, the Germans occupied Carcassonne, the upper Carcassonne.
Yeah.
They used it as a munitions depot.
Oh, geez.
So nobody dared try and attack it. In 1961, the entire old medieval city was declared to be a museum. And, of course, in 1997, it was made a World UNESCO Heritage Site. And it has become a huge visitors' success.
Yeah.
In 2011, there were over 4 million people
It's
who
very
visited
popular.
Carcassonne. And, of course, the most of the time that they visited is, in fact, in the summer. So, just like with some other places that are extremely popular, this is a basic how-to of going to visit the city of Carcassonne. It is a place that is so crowded in July and August that I would suggest that unless you must visit the south of France, do not go to the south of France in the July and August, because like almost every other big important tourist place, it is packed. Now, what we're talking about is a walled city that is 9 hectares. That's 15 acres. The streets inside it are still the original, very narrow, steep, cobblestoned streets filled with shops.
Yeah.
There is...
Well, it's a bit touristy, you know.
It's very touristy.
Yeah.
But that means is that it's also... It's not... I don't find touristy to be a bad word, personally. I have no problem with touristy. However, what that means is that if you want to move up and down these streets and get to see things, there are times, and this is true even on weekends in May and June or September, when you literally cannot make it up and down these streets. It is so crowded with people.
Yeah, but I mean, I've always managed, and I've been so many times every time of year. If you're going with a stroller or a wheelchair, it's a problem because it's cobblestones. Again, this is another one that I did with a wheelchair. It's not super pleasant, I must say.
It's not.
So, yeah.
I think this is my advice, okay?
Yeah.
I think that, again, get there either at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, earlier in the morning is better. Or,
and this is always the case, I would say you can do much better if you go at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A lot of people, and there are buses and buses and buses, of course, of tourists who show up, but they tend to all show up the first half of the day.
Yeah.
The other thing is, don't go on a Sunday. Even during the height of the season, of the tourist season, you're better off going during the week if you can avoid going on a weekend, because the stores and everything inside are open 7 days a week. This is not a place that ever closes in the height of the season. However, either you get there very early in the morning or get there towards the end of the afternoon when it's a little bit easier, because most people, basically what they do is they go in, they walk the streets, they visit. I would say probably about half the people that go in visit the chateau, but you pay extra to go in, of course, to the chateau. You don't pay anything to go into the old city.
Right, that's important.
You don't pay anything.
It's free.
It's free. But you pay to go into the chateau that counts, because it's also very beautiful, very interesting. It has a museum.
Yeah.
And it has a very interesting museum. And there are even 2 times a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, visits in English, although I must say that having had to do simultaneous translation for people, these are very approximative visits in terms of their English. You're better off getting the brochure that's translated into English and actually just doing the visit on your own inside the Count's castle.
Just listen to us.
But it gets you to walk on a part of the ramparts that you don't necessarily get into if you go to the chateau.
Yeah.
And then visit the church, because the church has the most beautiful stained glass windows in all of southwest of France. There are windows that are as beautiful as the windows you will see in Notre Dame or Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. There are 6 of these windows, and they are the original windows. And it's unique in the southwest of France, where for strange reasons there are not a lot of beautiful stained glass windows. But the other thing, and I've, like you, have gone there endless times. I've gone there on my own. I've gone there with my family. I've gone there for work. I love going there. The shops are wonderful. And there are...
You like the shops?
The shops, I will tell you that there are 2 shops there. If you're interested in table linens,
yes.
if you're interested in things like that, that is one of the best places you can get them, and they are not more expensive than anywhere else. And it is loaded with restaurants, and there are a couple of very fine restaurants inside the old cité. And you can go there and have a lovely lunch on the outside square, which is called the Place Marcoux. Or you can go and have a dinner there, because everything stays open till fairly late at night. I think you can actually even order at 10:30 at night in the summertime. It is really beautiful, and it's really a special place. And you have to just basically tune out the fact that you're surrounded by lots of other people.
Yeah, there's going to be lots of other people. So what's fun when you go with little children is that they sell all these wooden swords and for protection for the little knights, and kids just go wild for that stuff. And there are a couple of very nice little toy stores.
There are wonderful toy stores. They have lots of things. Quite honestly, they have all
good ice cream shops. They have
wonderful ice cream shops.
They have a really good candy store too.
They have a museum of torture, if you're into such things.
Yes.
They have all of, not only the for little children, all of this knights equipment, but they have, I really like it. I mean, they have T-shirts with beautiful silk screened images of the various scenes of the city, of the old city. There are lots of things that I find really interesting that you can get there that are actually hard to find in the surrounding areas. Mm-hmm. You can get a wonderful meal there, and there's one event, one day a year or one night a year, that is very, very special, and that is on the 14th of July. They do fireworks in the old cité. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens is they evacuate the entire cité because it's the Army Corps of engineers with their explosives that set up fireworks on both sets of ramparts. Mm-hmm. And you have to see this to believe it. If you are someone who loves fireworks, it is one of the most magnificent displays of fireworks you will ever see. Now they estimate that 700,000 people.
Where do you see it from,
You can see it from anywhere down below, but you have any kind of a view, even for kilometers around or up on a hill, as long as you have a view of it, one side of the old city. And then, there is a stop on the autoroute that is a stop that's made specifically for seeing the view of it. Well, that's my favorite place to go. Of course, you have to get there early. In fact, people show up in the morning with a picnic and spend the whole day just to see this.
I'm not spending the whole day there.
But what they do is they close off all the streets down below, and people come and just stand there and wait, because this takes place at about 10:30 at night. They have to wait till it's really dark. But imagine that many people coming to see it. I happen to love firework displays.
Yeah.
But you do have to get there early. Otherwise, you will never get a spot where you can really get a good view of the whole thing. And of course, sometimes people, very clever entrepreneurial people, will say, pay me a few euros and you can come up to the roof of my house and see it from there. But basically, anywhere you have a view of the old city from down below or from one of the hills around it is a good place to see the fireworks. And it's come to be famous as the fireworks for all of France.
I might try to go there this year, because we'll have visitors from California with us, so it'll be very fun, I think.
Oh, I think it's fun. I think that it's a wonderful place to go, and it really is. If you extrapolate out from the touristy quality of it, the great ice cream parlors, all of the shops, and you have to remember that even in the Middle Ages, it was a place that was filled with shops anyway.
Sure.
That it's got restaurants. Well, of course, people do have to eat and all of that. It even has, I think, 4 or 5 hotels inside the old cité. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Besides, you have the Hotel de la Cité, the very, very classy one.
Yeah, there's several others.
There are several others. There's a youth hostel.
Oh.
There's a post office. Mm-hmm. You basically have everything you can find. I think most people spend about 2 hours there, really.
Yeah, I spend half a day, because we like to walk all around the ramparts and through the streets and go inside of the church. I think if you do all that, especially if you have kids with you, it takes a little longer.
And it's I find that it's a lovely place to eat.
Yeah.
It's a really nice place to either have lunch or to have a dinner, and there are lots of places.
The specialty of the area is cassoulet. And there are several restaurants that will offer that. Right. And it's decent. It's decent. Good. You'll pay 15 euros or 16 euros for a cassoulet lunch, which, it's
and there's
great.
There's one restaurant that's on the Place Marcoux. Not all the restaurants are open all year, but most of them are open at least on weekends all year long. And of course, in the 6 months out of the year, they're open all the time, 7 days a week. And there's one that is open, in fact, all year. And in the winter, they have a wild boar stew that's actually it's very good. Actually, it's cooked with red wine.
No, I will not eat bore stew anymore. I've had it enough.
You've had it enough.
I don't like it.
I know a few people have tried it just once in your life. It's that
No,
kind of
I've
thing,
had it plenty.
Yeah. But it's really a fun place to visit, and I think it's really interesting when you, as you said, walk the Lys, walk the walkways, and walk the ramparts. And when you do, take a good look at the towers and the walls, and notice the different sizes of the stone. Because the different sizes of the stone, of course, indicate different building periods, but it's not necessarily in chronological order from the bottom up. And that's one of the secrets of Carcassonne. And so if you go there, take a good look and take the podcast with you, because now I'm going to tell you, this is the secret of the walls. The small, regularly cut stone interspersed with 2 or 3 layers of red brick is real Roman wall. That is, it's almost 2,000 years old.
Goodness gracious.
The stone that is rounded, it's what they call in French bossu.
Yeah.
It's rounded, and it looks almost like fake stone. That's the stone that was used in the early 1300s when they did the second set of walls. It was the fashion. And the little bit of tower that was falling down that they rebuilt on the first original set of walls is like that. But basically, it's really from the very beginning of the 1300s. Occasionally, as you walk around, you will see filler in different places because the walls start to fall apart. If you notice on the first set of walls, the interior set of walls, there are places when you walk around, you will notice that there's this very big, massive stone exposed down below. It's kind of... That's where they had to dig and expose to even out the land in between the two. If you see big, massive pieces of stone, that is prior to the Romans.
Oh, wow.
And it was used both by the medieval people before and after the war to refill in when they had to dig things out. So huge, massive pieces are probably Celtic. The nice, well-cut little pieces of stone, very carefully placed, is Roman. The mishmash kind of stone is post-Roman. And the bumpy, rounded stone is actually from the 1300s.
Wow.
And then, obviously, there are places where you can see the modern renovation. But it's an awful lot of fun to walk around.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a great place. I hope you get a chance to visit. There's... The south of France is full of surprises.
Full of surprises. And on a clear day, you can see the Pyrenees on one side, on the Black Mountains on the other.
Yep, there's some wine in that area. I wouldn't say that it's top quality wine, but it's good,
Well,
it's
there are some
inexpensive.
good Corbière.
Exactly. Oh, Corbière, I enjoy very much. But they're trying to raise the level of
the old wines.
Yeah, of the old wines, because... For a while there, it was cheap and dirty.
It was, but we're really on one side the Minervois, on the other side the Corbière.
Well, there's no reason why it shouldn't be better. It just needs to be made more carefully.
There are some very good wines in those. Those are nice, fruity wines. Now, the only weather condition that people should be warned of, because of course it is a place that can get very hot in the summer, and it can be chilly in the winter. It has a lot of wind.
Yes, vent d'automne.
And even in the summer, on a day that's very hot, people are very often surprised by the fact that when you get up on top of this hill, there is this wind.
Yeah.
So always have a very light little jacket or cardigan with you, just in case.
Yeah, and you know what they say around here, le vent d'automne, c'est le vent des fous.
Yeah, it makes people crazy.
Yeah.
Maybe why we're all crazy in the south. Anyway, Carcassonne is a wonderful, wonderful
Yes,
place.
you should
And
go
obviously
see it.
a lot of people have figured that out because
Yeah,
they've hit over the 4 million mark.
lots of people. Well, thank you very much, Elise, again for a wonderful podcast. And we will talk to you all next Saturday.
And here we go again the next time.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.